Hi, everybody. It's Richard Van Camp. I am the comic book creator of Wheetago War Roth, Book One in the Wheetago War series with Christopher Shy, published by Renegade Arts Entertainment. And you are listening to True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Richard Van Camp about his new horror graphic novel, Wheetago War Roth Book 1 from Renegade Arts Entertainment. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, and YouTube Video. So please follow and subscribe to the podcast and video feed of your choosing. A recipient of the Order of the Northwest Territories, Richard Van Camp is a proud Tlicho Dene from Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, currently residing in Edmonton, Alberta. Richard is an internationally renowned storyteller and best-selling author of 30 books and graphic novels, including the Eisner-nominated Book 1 of the Spirit of Denendeh series, A Blanket of Butterflies, with artist Scott Henderson. His novel, The Lesser Blessed, was adapted in a feature film by First Generation Films. His graphic novel, Three Feathers, with artist Neiva Meteus, was also been adapted for film and is the only movie in the history of the world to ever be filmed in 4 different languages: Bush Cree, Dene, South Slavey, and English. Richard's short story Wheetago War, from his short story collection Night Moves, is now a stop-frame animation movie with Spotted Fawn Productions and the National Film Board of Canada. Richard's new graphic novel, Wheetago War Roth, illustrated by Christopher Shy, is published by Renegade Arts Entertainment. Roth Book 1 of the Wheetago War, noted by CBC as one of the 23 comics to check out this fall, is the story of the revered hero known as the Child Finder, who is fighting to cling to his humanity after a Wheetago attack. A mother, her son, and a desperate band of convicts form an uneasy alliance to survive the Wheetago horrors now awakened. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Richard Van Camp about his new horror graphic novel, Wheetago War Roth, Book 1 from Renegade Arts Entertainment. So, Richard Van Camp, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
John, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I appreciate your time. It's been a while since we've chatted. Before I go on with all the questions, I would like to know, what's on your bedside reading table? What are you reading today?
You know, John, I knew you were going to ask this question, and it's so great to just talk comics with you. You know what's interesting is I've been collecting comics for probably 46 years. I'm 53 now. I've got, I think, I've pared it down to maybe 6 long boxes.
Wow.
And yeah, I know. But what's really interesting right now as an avid, comic book and graphic novel creator, I'm only reading one series, and that is Something is Killing the Children.
Ah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. It doesn't disappoint. And what's interesting is, when you start, you collect everything. You're just goo goo gaga for the art and the story, and whether it's the different publishing house, like when IDW first started with 30 Days a Night, or you see what Boom Studios is up to, or you just see all these new comic book publishers coming out, like Renegade, for example, and they really pique your interest. You go, oh, finally, my people, I can finally run with my herd. But it just seems to me, as I look around, I'm really not interested in the superhero stuff. I look around and just nothing captivates me, and I look forward to the next big thing in my heart. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, when I lived in BC, I remember holding The Walking Dead issue 3 in my hand and going through it and grabbing it. And I woke up the next morning and I drove from comic shop to comic shop because I just knew I needed 1 and 2. And I got to meet Robert Kirkman down in the States. I was at a Comic-Con there, and I said, Robert, I think you should win the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature. And Robert Kirkman said, I like you already. Thank you. What's your question? And I got to ask him my $1 million question, which was, who's Negan? Where did Negan come from? And I'll leave it to him because I'm sure,
Hmm.
Robert Kirkman has talked about Negan and all that. But I followed The Walking Dead for 10 years, issue after issue. It never let up, it never disappointed. It carried me through so much, just like Something is Killing the Children. So it's interesting that, I'm 53 now. I got a little extra pocket money every Sunday when I go to We Have Issues here in Edmonton, Alberta, my favorite toy and comic shop in Edmonton. We Have Issues on 99th. Love it. Love everything about the store. You walk in there and you're using your peripherals, but you're missing stuff. You're missing stuff. I'm talking about the toys that would just make your heart purr. But
Hmm.
I'll be honest with you, the only comic that's holding my attention right now, I'm talking about a series,
Yep.
is Something is Killing the Children. And I'm
Very good.
excited. They sold the series to Netflix. I'm excited to see where they're going to take it. I think it's just kick ass and it never lets up.
That's cool. That's good stuff. Absolutely.
Mm.
Now, it's been a long time since we chatted. I was just looking at my files. It was about 2 years ago when we started talking about your graphic novel, A Blanket of Butterflies, which has gone to
Mm.
great success. And now you have a new graphic novel, sort of like the other end of the spectrum, called Roth. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that story for those not familiar with it.
Sure. Let's talk about A Blanket of Butterflies because I have
Oh,
exciting news. I got gossip.
oh, okay.
I'm giving you the scoop. So, A Blanket of Butterflies was volume one in my Spirit of Denendeh series with Highwater Press out of Winnipeg, who just turned 15 years old this year. And I want to say a big happy birthday to everybody at Highwater, our publisher, Catherine Gerbasi. But A Blanket of Butterflies was a dream come true for me, John, because A, it's based in my community, Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. You can see the water tower, the museum. It's based on a real suit of samurai armor that's at our museum. And there's three theories about how it ended up there. And here's mine. I like to think somebody who was hung over at Canada Post at Customs received 6 boxes of samurai armor, and they were just so partied out, they couldn't quite squint hard enough to make out where it was supposed to go. And they said, you know what? There's a Fort Smith in the Northwest Territories of Canada. Let's send it there. Those guys need something to talk about. When you look at when you Google it, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, USA, there's a War Memorial Museum with a whole wing devoted to samurai armor. In my Van Camp universe of make believe and the Snuffleupagus, that to me is how it should have gone down. I don't actually give two hoots how it really ended up there. So, A Blanket of Butterflies is the genesis of volume one and about a man who comes to reclaim it and a young Tlicho Dene boy named Robbie who goes and helps them. So, did you know that we have volume two in this series? It's called As I Unfold You in Petals.
Oh, no, I did not know that.
Yeah, let's we'll send you a copy and then let's do a show on that because we've actually sold TV and film rights to Loretta Todd for both A Blanket of Butterflies and As I Unfold You in Petals. And we're really excited because we want to do a feature film. We also want to do a TV series based on those two graphic novels and several of my short stories that feature Torchy and Flinch and Sven and Benny the Bank and Crow. And we're really over the moon, to work with Scott Henderson as a dream come true. We have colorist Donovan Yachuk. So we're here to talk about Wheetago War Roth. And this, I mean, everything I do is always a dream come true because
Mm,
when you collaborate with graphic novels, it's always a dance of trust. And you realize, much like with a novel, I've got a new novel out called Beast, it's your editors that help you take your craft where you never could alone. With graphic novels, it's your fellow artist, it's your collaborator, it's your publisher, it's your editor. They're the ones that help you take your story where you never could have alone. And I can think of so many examples where Scott Henderson, with A Blanket of Butterflies and As I Unfold You in Petals, said, wait a minute, we've only got 51 pages. You've just blown 6 pages on a fight. Let me
mm.
do a splash page and I'll put all the ninjalics in the background, and which is what you see when you open A Blanket of Butterflies. I think it's on page 5 and 6 where Scott Henderson was able to take 6 pages of my script writing. One of my favorite action sequences, martial art fights of all time is and when you can Google this, the train scene in Old Boy, the
Oh,
original.
mhm.
I wanted to do that in my graphic novel, but Scott Henderson, as a master of efficiency, put it in 2 pages, and we didn't lose anything at all. So, how do we do Wheetago War Roth? Well, I've always wanted to work with Alexander Finbow of Renegade Arts Entertainment because, probably like you, John, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, what did I love? I loved Savage Sword of Conan. I loved Epic Magazine. I loved, oh my God, Conan Saga. I like Mike Grell. I have every Warlord. I
Hmm.
started with issue 13 of the Warlord for me, Mike Grell. And then I got into, there's always Cracked and Mad Magazine but Heavy Metal Magazine.
Right.
So as a lifelong comic book collector, I just felt when I read anything that Alexander Finbow here in Alberta and Canmore, Alberta was putting out, whether it was his Shame series or the Pass Me By series or any of the earlier work, I always felt that same feeling like, oh my God, I'm holding Heavy Metal Magazine again. I'm holding a publisher who's fearless, who is just really honoring what the artists want to do and create and put out there in the world. So I'd always wanted to work with them. And I used to live in Vancouver a long time ago, and a bunch of my friends were in a movie called Pathfinder, which came out a long time ago. And I saw it and I recognized quite a few of my buddies, and I was really proud of them. I had no idea it was based on a graphic novel. And then 2 days later, I was at Sophie's Books in Vancouver, and the great Christopher Shy. And when I held that in my hands, I said, I have got to find a way to work with this artist. I had never, and I'm a huge, like, I love Ken Williams and George Pratt and John Bolton. I such a huge Bill Sankovich. I'm such a huge fan of Sophie Campbell. I'm such a huge fan of painted, sculpted, sketched. I don't need clean lines. I just loved what Christopher, and it was so nightmarish. I love the palette of doom and gloom that Christopher Shy uses. I don't know how he does what he does. I just knew that I wanted to work with him, and I ended up, of course, writing to him as a fan, and then following him, and then how I wrote Wheetago War Roth was I actually wrote all 3 volumes, and I find, John, that's the best way to do it for
Hmm.
anyone who's listening who's a comic book creator. I find it's just easier to work in your own little shire. Don't let anyone know what you're working on, and you've got all the power. It's your time to world build and character build and really arc, the setups and the payoffs, and plant those seeds in volume 1 and have them all delivered in volume 3. So I worked on volume 1, 2, and 3 of Wheetago War, and I sent it to Alexander Finbow, and then he went goo goo gaga. He lost his mind, which is always what you want.
Sure.
And we fight because I'd been in touch with him for quite a few years, and he felt at that time, and we just launched the book Wheetago War Roth at the Edmonton Expo, and he said on a panel that he found that this was the one project that I had pitched to him that he simply could not say no to. That this was going to be big for all of us, and that's what you want. And then when he said, "Well, who do you want to illustrate it?" I said, "We got to work with Christopher Shy." Christopher Shy is the only artist who can capture the doom and gloom and dread and grace in the story of Volume 1. And we're all fathers, and this is really a story about parenthood. It's about fatherhood and what you would do for your family. So Wheetago War Roth is about a child finder. His name is Ross. He has single-handedly returned over 500 missing children to their families. This is what he does. He's very good at it. And unfortunately, the story goes that the big oil companies have dug up the Wheetago that were buried a long time ago. And the Wheetago are beings of insatiable hunger. And the story goes is that the more they eat, the hungrier they become, the more they drink, the thirstier they become. They will consume themselves as they pursue others to devour. And you can either be bit and turn into one, or you can be cursed and turned into one. So the story goes with Wheetago War Roth, Ross is returning home after safely returning a young person to their family, realizes that Edmonton is overrun with the Wheetago now that they've returned, and he is bit. But he is holding rat root, and rat root is one of our most powerful medicines in the Northwest Territories. It's the root that the muskrat love, and you can use it to smudge, you can use it to fight off colds, you can use it for spiritual protection. So Ross does not fully turn to a Wheetago, but he inherits their strength. And he is up at his cabin. When he is bit, he retreats to his cabin, and it's there that he discovers 4 escaped prisoners who have also fled the Wheetago. They're still in their handcuffs, and they have to make a deal. And the deal is, don't eat us, free us from these shackles. We'll go to Edmonton and get your family and bring them back to you because we can go where you can't. And you'll see in the illustrations that Ross has turned half Wheetago. He is very grotesque looking. He's a giant. He's powerfully built. And the title Roth, that is actually his Wheetago name. He's not Ross anymore. The Wheetago know him as Roth. And so this is about what would you do if your family was trapped in Edmonton, Alberta, and you had all the power in the world in your body. But the worry is if you drop the rat root or it's pulled from your grip, you turn full Wheetago, you will eat your own children.
Oh my. Wow.
So that's volume one. And then volume two, we're working on. And then volume three is called All Out War. And that is global war with the Wheetago and somebody very precious named Dove who leads the resistance.
My goodness, that is something. I got to go back and ask you a couple questions, though. That's a lot you've told me there. You mentioned The Walking Dead and how you have a
Ooh.
fondness for it. I read somewhere that this is called an indigenous version of The Walking Dead. And I want to ask you, is that a fair comparison, though?
Well, I think it's the indigenous Walking Dead. Somebody called it the indigenous Walking Dead, and that just kind of stuck. I think that's a real compliment because I'm a huge fan.
Okay.
I never watched the show actually until years later, and I was bored. I think it was 40 Below. I was somewhere, and I said, you know what? Let's give it. Let's just see. It was okay. I mean, nothing beats the series, the comic book series. I'm glad they're releasing it in full color for new fans. I think that's great for a new generation. I think in books two and three, you're going to see, well, hundreds of Wheetago who have returned. They have their own spiritual power. They can call back the Na'acho. And so, John Wareham from the Northwest Territories, there was a great Tlicho Dene elder named George Blondin who wrote several books, Yamaraya, When the World Was New. I was very lucky to be Mr. Blondin's editor for the last book he ever wrote when he was still alive. It's called Trail of the Spirit, Mysteries of Medicine Power Revealed. And he writes about the Na'acho. And a long time ago, when the world was new, there were these giant cannibalistic animals. So giant eagles, giant bats, giant beavers, giant wolverines that ate the people. And it was our lawmakers, Yamaraya and Yamaja, who had a treaty with the animals that they would shrink them down, that they would no longer eat the people. And that was the deal. Any animal that refused was killed. But in my mind, in my big gossipy mind, John, I thought, well, what about the giants who hid? So in Wheetago War, the Wheetago know how to call those cannibal giants back. And so they've called them. And you get to see one. It's a grizzly in book one. But get ready for All Out War because they're calling so many animals you can't even imagine back. And they're all starving for our human meat, John.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, can't
It's
wait
gonna
for
be
that.
it's gonna be a gristle popping good time,
I
buddy.
bet, I bet. Now you mentioned Christopher Shy, how you wanted to work with him and you did for this book. And yes, definitely reminded me of Bill Sienkiewicz. A lot of that
Yes.
very haunting, very haunting. Now you said, let me just go back to this. The process of making this, you written books one, two, and three, and you said, okay, Christopher, there you go. Was there any sort of back and forth that you come back and say, hey, what about this or what about that? Or was
Oh,
it
all
just
the
like,
time.
oh, really? Oh,
All the time. You know, when you look at book one and you look at the script, it is so much better. It's so much more compact in terms of just crushing these escaped prisoners so they can't leave. Mila Antoine's character, we just changed her name at the last moment. When you look at the characters and how they really need each other in the first book, that was more Christopher than anything because I've written novels and short stories and all that. I'm a lyricist, I think, or a prose writer. Whereas again, Christopher Shy in his infinite wisdom went, wait a minute. It would be far more visually compelling if they actually couldn't leave right away and they had to get a treaty where the worry is that if Ross drops that rat root, he's going to eat us all. And we're all going to watch. I mean, once they scream and freeze you, you watch as you're being devoured.
yeah, very haunting. That's for sure. It's
I don't know if I answered your question, but there
yeah.
was so much back and forth. And I actually felt like for the last 3 years, I've been cheating at life because yes, we live in overwhelming times. But when you wake up on a Tuesday morning and there's 4 new panels from the great Christopher Shy in your Dropbox,
Mm,
it's like Christmas came 8 months early.
sure.
Yeah, it's been, and we've had Zooms where we do the 50-minute freebie, and Alexander, our publisher, I think he just dreads them because we always go over without even talking about the comic because we're too busy hyperventilating about UFOs, Sasquatches, and the little people.
Sure.
And yeah, we're kindred spirits with just great wicked storytelling. And
Sure.
then we eventually, a couple of Zooms later, get around to talking about
Right.
Wheetago
Yeah.
War. But yeah, this is very much a joint effort as it is, whether it's Steve Sanderson, I've worked with the great Cree artist on Path of the Warrior, whether it's Scott Henderson and, with Blanket of Butterflies and As I Unfold You in Petals. It's always a joy to work with an artist who is just as committed to the creating the best, most riveting story that you can together. And I would just want to say, Alexander Finbo is also a fearless publisher, much like Catherine Jabassi with Highwater Press. And Alexander Finbo is also an ace editor, and he also was really good at streamlining so much of the story. The scripts were huge for volumes 1, 2, and 3, and you look at them now and you go, okay, I understand why we had to make certain cuts. I get it, and we get to bring what he cut back in the second volume.
Well,
Everybody's got secrets in this
yeah.
story. It's kind of like Lost.
Oh no, don't go there. Don't go on.
Okay, why did last season just break your heart or what?
I don't want to go on a tangent, but I don't think they had a clue what they were doing after the first season. They had no clue.
I,
That's
it
just
did
me.
feel like a little bit. It felt like a
Yeah.
little David Lynchish,
Yeah.
where at
Well,
some point you go, not even he knows what he's up to at this
yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But I'll
It's
go. I'll follow you. You're David Lynch. I'll go.
yeah, I guess.
Take
Anyway,
me wherever you want, David.
let's get talking about you. So your book is out. It will be coming out in October. What about promotion? I know you're doing some rounds on podcasts. Do you have any conventions or festivals coming up where you'll be promoting the book?
Oh, we have got we're I was looking at my calendar. I'm really excited. So we're doing a double book launch here at Audrey's Books in Edmonton on October 29th at 6:30 to 8. And we're gonna have Bannock John. Never mind the books, come for the Bannock. And we've got some beverages, so that'll be
Okay,
fun. I'm
sure.
going to the Vancouver International Writers Festival, the Ottawa International Writers Festival. Yellowknife is bringing us up to the Northwoods Writers Festival, but we're open to anything. I love Comic Cons. I love anything literary because you end up sitting next to your heroes and your friends. And I love talking to people where you get the skinny behind how on earth did you do. And I think
Right.
this is why you do this podcast, because you've got the backstage pass to all these great publications that are coming out.
Well, it's really cool, as you say, you know a little bit behind the scenes. Like I was always a big fan of like, how did they do that? How did they make that movie? How did they do that? Give me your secrets. But I mean, ultimately, I mean, you can listen to that as much as you can, but ultimately it comes down to the imagination, of the creator. It's tough to share that. You can't say, here, let me share that with you and you can create your own, but you can inspire people. And that's a good thing too. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what's next for you? You mentioned books 2 and 3. Is that the next big thing? Roth book 2, or what's happening?
Yeah. Well, we've got a new novel out called Beast, and it's a young adult spiritual thriller. It's about three teenagers in 1986 in the Northwest Territories in my fictional community of Fort Simmer who have to stop an ancient spirit that's been called back by the town bully, Silver Cranes. And so we're promoting that as well as Roth. We're actually working together, both publishers, Douglas and McIntyre and Renegade Arts Entertainment. It's really nice to share in the resources of marketing, promotion, booking, different venues that maybe one didn't know about in the first place. It's really been great. It's cost sharing. I think it's really efficient where I get to go up to Yellowknife and launch both my books. I get to go to Vancouver, launch both my books, get to go to Ottawa, launch both my books. And maybe there are people there that aren't interested in graphic novels. They want a big honking novel like Beast, which is the biggest thing I've ever written. It's over 300 pages as a published book, over 400 pages when I think I handed it in. So there's something for everybody in I think what I'm doing. But certainly the next big things are promoting Beast and Wheetago War Roth. We've just sold TV and film rights, as you know, to Blanket of Butterflies and As I Unfold You in Petals, the graphic novels with Highwater Press. So I'm really interested in working with our director, Loretta Todd. I'm up for anything, actually. We're going to start editing books 2 and 3. I think right now we're so busy promoting and sending out promo issues and setting up podcast interviews and media. That becomes a full-time job in itself. But it's also a joy. Like I love John. You need to know. I love talking with you. It's a joy. It's
Well,
this is
I
this isn't
appreciate your
work. This
time.
is play. Well, how often do I get? I'm 53. How often do I get to sit around with another mammal and just celebrate illustrated literature?
That's true. It doesn't happen too often.
It doesn't happen too often on the
No,
playground. Let me tell you.
that's it. That's it. So with everything you've got going on now and in the future, where can people find you online?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. Well, if you want to order copies of the books, you can write to me at richardvancamp.com. There's a little contact the author slot there, but you can get in touch with me through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X. I'm on SoundCloud, YouTube, but we've just revamped my website, richardvancamp.com. You get to see all 30 covers of my books. Roth is the 30th book I've written in 30 years, and I think it's absolutely something to be very proud of. I'm so grateful to have worked with so many great publishers, so many great editors, so many great artists, colorists like Donovan Yachuk. An absolute joy, because I'll say this about comic books, because I don't get to talk about comics too often. Your colorist can take your story where you as the writer and anyone as the artist never could. Your colorist can take your story where it deserves to be. And that's why I wanted to work with Christopher, not only the way that he can, impose real people. And please know, in book one, Roth, we actually have real Dene and Indigenous models for the characters. For my community, we have Joel Evans, who played Larry Soul in I don't know if you know this, but I had a novel, The Lesser Blessed. It's now a major motion picture. You can watch it for free on Tubi. Joel Evans plays Larry Soul. So we asked Joel Evans to come back and play one of the characters. The former chief of the Salt River First Nations, Henry Beaver, it's his birthday today. Happy birthday, Uncle. He plays Glenn the Elder. And then we have David Burke from The Revenant. He acted in The Revenant. He also acted in Cut Bank with Billy Bob Thornton and Bruce Dern. We've got Dwight Moses from our community. So that's just from Fort Smith, where I'm from, and from Fort Simpson, we have Mila Antoine, who played the chief's daughter in The Revenant, playing the mother figure in Wheetago War, and we have her son Oz, who stars as Robbie. So we're using real Indigenous human beings, real Dene, real friends as actors, and we'll be looking for other actors and models for books 2 and 3.
That's very cool. Well, Richard, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
Well, I always said that when we were working on Wheetago War Roth, I said, I feel this is just as good as the graphic novels that got me here. So when I think about Electra Assassin, Bill Sienkiewicz, right? When I think about Heaven's Butcher, Oink, John Mueller. When I think about Wet Moon, Sophie Campbell, and her work on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. When I think about, Arkham Asylum, Grant Morrison, Dave McKeon. When I think about all of my favorite graphic novels, whether it's, Cobra, The Last Laugh with Antonio Fuso's artwork. When I think about the treasures of my collecting career and my reading bliss, I said, I feel that this is just as good as all of that. And that's something to be proud. I feel like we finally arrived with illustrated literature and compelling storytelling and traditional knowledge from the Northwest Territories. I feel like we brought the best of the Northwest Territories. As horrific as it is, I think you're also going to see the beauty of who we are, even though this is terrifying stuff.
Thanks to Richard for the chat. You can discover more about Richard online at richardvancamp.com and on Instagram at instagram.com/richardvancamp. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, and YouTube Video, so please follow and subscribe to the podcast and video feed of your choosing. You can follow along at True North Comics on most social media sites, and you can send any and all feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2024.